The First Book of Christ for Atheists, Chapter 4, Christianity and a Trip to Ireland. I include in this trip here to identify my heritage, which might have some bearing on my behavior or lack thereof. Ever since I have been asked to go to Ireland by my father when the kids were small, I've wanted to fulfill that invitation, although I had wished that my father could have made it with me. I was trying to make up for one of life's regrets by visiting the country that my family on my father's side had come from. Trafalgar Tours made it easy to experience Ireland by supplying a knowledgeable guide and hosting us in nice hotels with ample dining and tour experience. Starting out in Dublin, the tone was set for the history of this island as we visited the Irish Emigration Museum. Much like the Manitoba Museum of Human Rights in Winnipeg, which was initialized by the Izzy Asper Foundation and the federal government, both museums told stories in various displays. In the Epic Museum, we saw displays about the first inhabitants through the invasions, various kingdoms, and strife. The Ring of Kerry predated recorded history, and those that made the rings left the island with no one knowing who they were. Regarding the famine, the ship's contract tickets to pay for passage to foreign lands was provided by the absentee landlords back in London who just wanted the farmers off the land because the lords paid taxes based upon how many people worked on their lands. No potatoes, no work. If saving the children from starvation was the landlord's wish, alternative crops could have been sown, access to the ocean could have been allowed, and several other ways of getting protein were obvious to me as we toured Ireland in 2023. A year of famine I could understand, but 7? On the ship, each family was given one sleeping space. With what I saw, there was space for 2 or 3 adults. 1 hour a day is all they had on deck unless the sea was rough, in which case they had to stay below deck. I got a copy of a contract for one 20-year-old, a female going to Savannah, Georgia. Carol got a contract for the Murphy family where 8 were going. The principle behind the English process was to extract earnings from the crop. The worker would do the work and pay the landlord for the right to work on the landlord's land. This land was formerly owned by the Irish, but when Oliver Cromwell discovered Ireland, the ownership went to deserving English that either participated in the slaughter or at least condoned the ownership be changed and given to the English lord. It's a story well repeated, and it brought wealth to the privileged at the expense of the worker. When there was no crop, there was no income. Based upon the British Poor Law of 1834, if the worker didn't pay a share to the lord, he would be sent to the poorhouse, leaving his family to starve to death. With a change in government in England, Sir Charles Travan, who was in charge of the relief effort in Ireland, based his support or lack thereof on the laissez-faire principle promoted by Adam Smith, which believed that supply and demand would make the necessary corrections. Sir Charles Lilly also stood up for the evangelical belief that the judgment of God sent the calamity to teach the Irish a lesson. How Christian. Sorry, but I had to repeat this as it makes my blood boil, and boiling blood gives my life purpose. My wife doesn't understand it either. Those who helped the Irish more than the English were groups in the USA. The North American indigenous Choctaws have a statue in County Cork, Ireland, recognizing their contribution to the famine relief. 16 years earlier, the Choctaws suffered famine as the U.S. government tried to resettle them with disastrous results. Knowing the anguish of dying from starvation prompted them to do their part to help another starving nation. The Jewish community in New York also helped, as did the Sultan of Ottoman Empire. Poor countries, such as the Caribbean, also did what they could. Okay, I got that off my chest. Rural dandelion Britannia and all that rot. The emphasis of the tour was general and by no means political. This was a good thing because otherwise it could rile up those that believe in justice and fairness. I I, for one, have a hard time with cruelty. As the tour went on, my blood was getting hotter in spite of the tour effort to inform and not be political. We left Dublin, which holds almost 30% of the Irish population. Immigrants represented 12%, and it was noticeable in hotels and restaurants, as servers and workers in the hotels were often from Africa or Eastern Europe. A fellow once told me that you could see drunken Irishmen coming out of pubs in midday. I was hoping he was wrong, and he was. While pubs were everywhere, I didn't see the drunkenness I was expecting. Waterford was an interesting place as we watched them making crystal items in their factory. Wife Carol felt that glass blowing and air quality was a health problem in the factory, but she managed to keep her opinion to herself. Really, I was surprised too. The colloquial dialect in the Waterford area is being spoken in St. John's, Newfoundland to this day, and is even though the migration took place in the 1600s. In Killarney, we saw old English-style phone booths being repurposed as defibrillator stations. We kissed the Blarney Stone. I thought it would be easy. It wasn't. By the time I had bent over backwards and lifted myself back up again, I got so dizzy, I thought that I had come out of a pub. I won't do that again, although I might go back to a pub. Certainly, if you believe in fairies, leprechauns, spells, and magic, Ireland is the place for you. Christ has a strong presence there as well. I was so looking forward to reciting some of my favorite limericks in Limerick, but Michael, our tour guide, told me that we were on a family bus. I won't have the sequence right, but we did go to Adair. At the cliffs of Moher, we took a rain-pelting, wind-blowing walk up the left side past the exhibit building. It was bad, but not as bad as the next 2 days, when they closed the site due to high winds and dangerous conditions. Looking from the heights, I couldn't see how the water could get that high, but I suppose you could get blown off the cliff. Spectacular view. The Ring of Kerry was an interesting place. Long before written records were kept on, ancient tribes made 9 huts with an inner and outer circle. Putting livestock in the center would provide heat for the dwellers that would live on the outside ring. I think it was there that we saw a cone-shaped building with a hole on the top and pigeon nesting boxes around the circular inner walls. What a wonderful way of feeding a family, and certainly it would ward off starvation. I would think that information was hard to pass on, as people tended to live and die close to home years ago. The ocean was a good place to ward off starvation as well, but the English restricted the access to the Irish. In Ballysteen, we saw a shrine to Bridget. It was an interesting story of how St. Bridget organized several convents around Ireland and is attributed with providing abundance and prosperity to those that seek it. Our driver, Keith, has a St. Bridget cross on his front dash and side doors of his bus. Her story goes back to the 4th century, and her father was a Celt who could sell his daughter if he wanted to. I find it interesting how we evolve as a species, becoming more compassionate and caring unless we follow what is written in a holy book. Then it is the will of God. That is why I consider the grassroots Catholic as the true Catholic. Being made in God's image allows us the right to think, to understand the universe as we learn generation to generation. While leadership follows ancient doctrine written by those without the knowledge we have today, rules are set that hold back common sense. As much as I find Pope Francis to be a wonderful pontiff, I think that us grassroots type can logically see that women can make as good a priest as men, and without wicks to dip where they don't belong. Did I just say that? The Bunratty Castle medieval banquet was a blast. The food and wine was plentiful, and the entertainment superb. Narrow, winding stairs would be the sobriety test as we left at the end of the night. I fell 3 flights, but I was saved only by my drunkenness as I fell in a relaxed state. At Galway, Carol and I rented a car and ventured towards the land where my grandparents emigrated from, I believe around 1910. With Aunt Stacia, Uncle Jack, and Uncle Tom in tow, they made the trip by ship with two brothers, Jim and Mike. My father would have been the first of their family to be born in Canada in 1913. Renting a car, we traveled to Cootehill in County Roscommon and visited St. Michael's Church, where we met the former post office manager and happened to be coming out of the church as we were going in. The Reverend Brendan McDonough wasn't available, so we walked around but didn't see the landmarks that my cousins who had traveled here previously had seen. There were new homes built in traditional Irish stone and new business surroundings that surrounded the community. I suppose if Coot Hall was as prosperous back in 1910, the family probably would not have, they probably would have stayed in Ireland. I will follow up with Father McDonough to see if we can locate records of Molly, who some of my cousins have met, but who has since passed, as well as my grandfather's brother Bernard, who chose to stay where he was. As we looked around, we noticed a gravestone with Father Thomas Gallagher's name on it. Born in 1873, he passed in 1935. I doubt we are related, but it's worth checking out. As we were leaving the area, we saw the real estate sign with Bernadette Gallagher's name on it. Could she be named after Bernard, our relative? It will be worth investigating. Having walked on the grounds of my grandparents and visiting the church that they would have gone to, we headed back to Galway. I was pondering if we should ever come back when an explosion boom was left on my left front tire. At first I thought it could be that their IRA had attacked. As I slowed down and pulled to the side, I inspected what turned out to be two flat tires, both on the left. Probably ran over something sharp. Do you think? That was enough for me to be convinced that I shouldn't go back, as bad omens and superstition is not out of my wheelhouse. We had a limerick contest for the last day on our tour, so I submitted this, the homestead trip. Of a rental car we required, for a trip to Roscommon we desired. From Galway town we headed down, at Cootehill we finally retired. The shrine at Knock is where we caught up with the bus, as Carol and I had to drop off the rental after our tour bus had left the next morning. We took a public bus to Knock to look at the Shrine for Mary, appearing in an apparition back in the 1800s. We got to Sligo, where we had arranged to meet with my namesake, who lives there and has been forwarding my mail for probably 10 years. It's a reminder to have a unique email address, as the only difference between Ken's and mine is I have a T between my first and last names. It turns out, and I had no doubt, but you can never tell, Kenneth Gallagher is a fine Irish gentleman of 42 with a wife, Natasha, and children, Liam and Fionn. Unfortunately, Natasha had babysitting issues and Kenneth had a course, so we only met up with himself after 9 p.m. and had a short but very special visit. If they were ever to come our way, they definitely would be welcome. Once again, in the Limerick spirit, I wrote, The Meeting of the Kens. When we traveled down to Sligo town, we weren't looking for trouble, but with wine and beer and Guinness within us, we actually began to see double. With a rainy final day, we got back to Dublin, but on the way we were able to have a limerick competition. At the banquet that night, Michael had advised us that last year the prize was a trip to the Caribbean. They called my name first, so when I went up to the front of the bus to collect my prize, it was a whiskey flask. You can imagine my disappointment. No whiskey in it. Goodbye to new friends. To friends we never knew, across the ocean we flew. From Dublin to Sligo we went everywhere. We even saw Blarney and stopped in Adair. So goodbye to all friends as we bid you adieu. As parting souvenirs, Carol blitzshopped to try to get the best gift for everyone we know. I looked for a memento to add to my license plate collection for all the places we have visited. They say to be wary of gypsy street vendors and be careful with their trickery. I feel that I have a pretty good judgment of people. Having worked as a salesman and working with St. Vincent, you get to know who you can trust. The stores had license plates that were kind of crude, using the Irish accent, but saying things such as "Ficanidget." I wanted something nice to hang in my garage, and it was the street vendor who had what I wanted. He said he had a plate that said in Irish, "You'll never walk alone," which I gladly purchased. So I close my story about Ireland, about my Ireland trip. I will say to you, Pog Mon Thoin.